So let's talk a little bit about water. The reason we need to talk about water is because water is in our body. I believe it's about 60%, 65% of our body. And the cerebrospinal fluid is about 99% water. Okay. And so when we look at the cerebrospinal fluid as a fluid, it is different than the blood because it doesn't have all the red blood cells or the white blood cells that increase the concentration of the blood and makes it be less water. So when you if in any healthy animal or human being, um, if you were to get a sample of the cerebrospinal fluid, it's crystal clear. It's like spring water. It's like, if you took out a blood or even lymph tissue, it would have like well, blood being red, or like a yellowish sort of tinge to it. So water has got many different properties that I'm not going to go I'm not going to go into in great detail. The one property that is really coming out in new research is research that has been done by Dr. Pollack. Um, how many of you have heard about the fourth phase of water? Okay, good. So this is really stuff that has kind of come out in the last 10 years, maybe. Um, and we always thought of water as, essentially having three phases. And what we say, by phases is states that water could behave in, and that was ice, liquid, and steam, vapor, for instance, a gas, right? So if you took ice and heated it up, you got to water, liquid. And if you took liquid and heated that up, the first thing you would see is you would see some steam rising from the water, and that is water that has been vaporized. Um, in a process of condensation, if you were to collect the steam, and you've probably done this, right? Let me take a steam bath, right? You go and you put your face in steam, and what do you see on your face? Well, you see water droplets on your face because the steam comes and finds your face, and then it cools because your face is cooler than the steam. So it cools and then it becomes liquid again. And then if I took that liquid and froze it and made it cold enough, it would be ice. All right. So if you can think about this, right, if you became a water molecule, which is two hydrogens and an oxygen, okay, if you became a water molecule, two hydrogens and an oxygen, and were a piece of ice, and you are in ice, right? So here you are. And then you increase the temperature a little bit and you became liquid. Okay, now if I looked at you from the outside, I'd say, oh, it's liquid water. But from an H2O perspective, all right, from a hydrogen perspective or a hydrogen to oxygen perspective, nothing has really changed except for the molecule is moving a little bit more than it was in ice. And maybe there's a little bit more space between the hydrogen, the H2O molecules. But from a hydrogen perspective, nothing has changed. Okay. And from an oxygen perspective as well, nothing has changed. Now we take that water and we boil it. Now the water molecules are vibrating faster, right? And then all of a sudden, here you are in a liquid form, and then all of a sudden you become steam. So from a visual perspective, I see that the state has changed. But again, from a molecular perspective, it hasn't changed at all. it's still H2O. All right. I bring this up first of all because when we go through, I believe that we also have these similar sort of changes of states that look very different from the outside, but that can also be that it's essentially it's the same movement of the water molecule, that really nothing is changing. It's just a matter of how we perceive it to be changing as we're observers from the outside. The question is what are we relating with? What are we relating to? If you identify yourself as ice and then you change to liquid, you're going to be very confused. I'm not who I am anymore, right? But if you identify yourself as an H2O molecule, you're the exact same thing. And then as you vaporize, you're still H2O. You're the exact same thing. So in your own practice, sort of asking yourself, well, what am I associating myself to? What am I relating to on a daily basis? Anyways, water has become almost I don't even know what to call it, almost like a spiritual molecule now. Right? There's a lot of research that's going into looking at, can water hold intentions? And a lot of people who were, selling bottles with words on the bottle, love, joy, hope, etc. There was a doctor who did some research on this, Dr. Emoto, who showed that water could sort of hold and store energy, and took these images of crystals that had been formed from water that had words on the water, and showed that the crystals that came from water that had more love and joy and things like that actually had more beautiful crystals, let's say. You may or may not believe that research, and that's totally up to you. There's a scientist, Dr. Dean Radin, who has actually tried to do a double-blinded experiment with that, and showed actually that in a double-blinded setting that maybe water can hold some sort of energetic intention or whatnot. Many people have used things like flower essences, Bach flower essences. I'm just curious, is there anyone here who has ever used a Bach flower remedy or a Bach flower essence? Okay, I see some hands. All right. When I was introduced to Bach flower remedies, for instance, I used to suffer from anxiety, and it was mostly anxiety from situational anxiety. And I went to go see somebody, and they said, "Oh, from what, just listening to my stories, he's like, from what it sounds, you should try this." I'm like, I was in medical school at the time. I was like, what is it? What is a few droplets of water gonna do from this? I believe it was pine. I was like, what is a few drops? And I'm like, it doesn't hurt, right? And so I started using it, and whatever you want to say, right? Placebo or not placebo, I noticed a difference, right? And so the essence of that is that the water actually holds the energy of that healing medicine or plant. Okay, and there's some people who are looking into, even taking like a homeopathic quantity of like a real medication for seizures, or for chronic pain or something like that, and actually making like a Bach flower remedy and seeing can it have the same effect as 100 milligrams of a medication, whatever it might be. I think that's important research to do. It just is difficult to do and very expensive, and the funding for it doesn't come very, very frequently. So Dr. Pollack, many years ago, has proposed a fourth phase of water, and this phase of water, actually, what they were able to find is that this phase of water occurred when water interacted with what we call a hydrophilic surface, so a surface that is water loving, right? So hydrophilic is water loving. So when water comes into contact with a hydrophilic surface, it has this capacity to go into a fourth phase. So it's neither ice nor liquid nor gas, right? And that's why they call it the fourth phase of water, because what they noticed may happen with the appropriate conditions, and that's sort of the clincher to all this, is under the appropriate conditions that water can actually form this crystalline-like matrix. Okay. And so if it's making contact with the hydrophilic surface, all right, at the hydrophilic surface, in the appropriate conditions, and I'll get to what those are, that there is a property of the water that actually starts to form, and it's H3O, H3O2. H3O2, and it forms this crystalline matrix, and it starts to separate. The crystalline matrix actually starts to separate, okay? And what they call the zone of exclusion starts to occur. And this is sort of at the molecular level, okay? That next to the hydrophilic surface, right, you have a lot of a negatively charged area that starts to form. And there is a zone of exclusion. This is what they call a zone of exclusion that happens because any tiny particles are not present in this area. Okay. And the water molecules are lining up in like a very crystalline-like matrix fashion. Okay. And then, right next to this, so you have this hydrophilic surface, you have a lot of negatively charged water molecules, okay, H3O2, and then you have these positively charged, and this is where you find small particles. All right, so if you can imagine this zone, here's this hydrophilic surface. Right next to the hydrophilic surface is water that has essentially packaged itself into almost like a perfect crystalline matrix, negatively charged. And as this is being created, this is creating what's called a zone of exclusion, because it doesn't have any positively charged particles in it, and any larger molecules. So it's sort of like hydrophilic surface, negatively charged, positively charged. All right, and this is the fourth phase of water. Now, why is this important? Well, what they found was that water has a tendency of going into this phase when it is exposed to light and when it is exposed to infrared infrared light. And so you may have read some of the benefits of like infrared saunas, or infrared healing devices, or whatnot. It's just interesting to me that this fourth phase of water seems to uh, occur predominantly when we are exposed to infrared, or when water is exposed to infrared, or infrared light, or light. Okay. The reason why this is important is because anytime you have, so hydrophilic surface, negatively charged water and positively charged water with particles, this zone of exclusion, okay, anytime that you create a zone of negatively charged particles and a zone of positively charged particles, essentially what you create is you create a battery, right? You create a battery. You create a situation where electrons, because you have this difference in charge, now you create a situation where electrons can start to flow. Electrons can start to flow. And so in essence, when water goes into this fourth phase, essentially what the water is capable of doing is becoming a battery. It's actually capable of if you give it, just like you put a battery into a circuit, okay, and the light turns on, okay, imagine that the water in your spine and in your brain could actually be a battery, and the circuit is our body. Imagine that, right? And with the proper conditions, and we still don't know what those infrared, bathing in infrared sauna, maybe exposing ourselves to light, those in my opinion, those conditions will be worked out, but this capacity of this water to be able to do this is huge, is really big, because this is sort of like the capacity of the fluid, the water system inside our cerebrospinal fluid to essentially create a battery, right? That can turn on a circuit, right? Imagine like you have a light, a flashlight that's not working. What do? You take out the battery and you put in a new battery, and then you turn the on switch, right? The on switch just allows the electrons in the battery to start flowing through the entire circuit. And when the electrons flow, what can they do? They actually create electricity. And in that creation of electricity, you can turn on a light bulb. Okay, so a battery, in essence, is it's a chemical reaction that is creating then an electrical process. So there's a chemical reaction that's occurring that's creating an electrical process. Now, many people, the reason I bring this up with the cerebrospinal fluid, with Kundalini and stuff like that, is because many people have this felt sense of like, like the fizzing that you're talking about. Like almost like an electrical sort of circuit that has been activated, right? Almost as if uh, many people have sort of described it as, I felt like a shot of electricity went up through my spine. I felt like I was hit with a bolt of lightning. I felt like, it was like a light bulb had exploded at the top of my head, whatever it might be. Okay. And the question that I feel like we should be asking is, and this is, put forth in the hypothesis, is based on everything we know from the cerebrospinal fluid, based on the capacity that it can actually be water and yet be an electrolyte at the same time, so therefore have this capacity to actually be a battery, that it is a transmitter of information, that we know it can transmit information, that it's water, and so therefore we know it can transmit electricity quickly. Can it also be its own battery, its own storage of electrical information, the storage of electrical energy that is in chemical form? It's in chemical form in our cerebrospinal fluid, but that can be converted into electrical energy through exposure to something from the outside, sunlight, infrared light, right? Whatever it might be, various vibrations or frequencies that we're exposing ourselves to, maybe even, and this is a far stretch, but maybe even the breath, where the resonance and of our heartbeat, the resonance of our breath, in the proper conditions may actually trigger the cerebrospinal fluid to go into this fourth phase. When it goes into this fourth phase, it creates this polarity. In that polarity, then we are creating a battery, and our body is the circuit on the battery. And so now we feel as if there's like there is literally an electrical charge that is created within the cerebrospinal fluid, and that's felt in the body, because the body is the circuit. Okay. So imagine your body, right, being the light bulb with the wires on a flashlight, and your cerebrospinal fluid being the battery that you put in. In 20 years, we're going to look back at all this and be like, oh my God. What? How did they know? How did they know this 20 years ago?
I'm wondering, Mauro, to add to your theory, I've been curious as to, are we also antennas? And so I'm like trying to add to it, what would be the antenna? And maybe the brain, because we know the brain generates an electromagnetic field as well, and it has, you can measure them.
Yes. So, with any antenna, we need to see what the signal is, right? So I actually think that that the brain is that. I feel like, so in a way, the whole body can work as an antenna. The brain being an antenna, the fluid itself can be an antenna. Because what's the signal? Well, if I'm doing breathing, yes, the whole body can be an antenna. And what is the different sort of sensitivities of the various antennas that are present, right? The heart can be an antenna. Your fingertips can be an antenna. The other, right, because since we're made up of so much water, even the lymphatic fluid in our hands and feet can be an antenna. Okay. So absolutely, absolutely, right? So if we so that's exactly the question, right? Is if we are antennas, what are the signals that we are bringing in? What are the signals that we are opening up to? What are the signals that we are that we are consciously sort of looking out for or resonating with, right? Because imagine, right, in your car, for instance, you have one antenna, and when you turn the dial on the radio, you can get different signals with different radio shows coming in. Okay, so what is your what is, just because it's one antenna now, I feel like now it's the workings of the body to be able to train ourselves to turn the dial to then, in essence, play the radio station that you want to play, right? Um, Somebody's saying here the electromagnetic field. Yes, people have looked at like Schumann resonances and things like that, like the electromagnetic field of the universe, the electromagnetic field of the world, the electromagnetic field of somebody else that you're coming into contact with, right? All this is an energetic field that we are bringing in, that we are perceiving, that we are. But the thing is there's a lot of energy now coming right now. Can we tune the signal so that the radio station that's playing is the radio station that you want it to be playing, right? That's kind of a big, right? Oh, wow. Wait, so how can I tune the signal? Uh, well, let's start first with, I'm seeing a lot of here, so drinking hydrated. Absolutely, right? What are you consuming? That's number one. Everybody wants to know, it's like what nutraceutical can I take to help are you breathing and hydrated? Because most of us aren't breathing hydrated or sleeping well. Okay, so forget all the nutrition. Start getting some good quality water. Um, and how alive the water we are drinking. It just harvested spring water. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I would try to get spring water, not in plastic, if you can, um, in glass. Uh, um, Let me just send a text here.
While you send a text, I know that crystals have an effect on a frequency. That's why they're used in clocks. So that's why, like, we've been drawn to using certain crystals because they can also tune or
Yes,
regulate our own signal.
exactly. And they might be filters.
Yeah.
Like as signals are coming, right, you might actually be able to like ting, like do like deflect them so that you don't even have to like worry about whatnot. Um, so um, so in we won't do the meditation, but now you can start seeing, right, this activation of the fluid. You're activating the fluid. You're starting to activate the fluid by the type of water that you're drinking, the type of food that you're eating, um, by the type of movements that you're making, by the resonance from the music that you're listening to. Everything, the crystals or not crystals in your in your home, the plants, everything, but also how your heart is beating, how we're breathing. And so there is a process of learning how to move this fluid appropriately, how to get it up into our third ventricle, how to make sure that it's flowing appropriately. And as it's doing this, opening up to this possibility that it's actually a perfect conduit for electrical information, electrical energy to be dispersed throughout your whole body. Right? So that the cerebrospinal fluid can actually become a battery within your body that can be activated. And the circuit is the body, the brain, the heart, the hands, the feet, everything. Right. And so if you feel that sort of electrical, right. And imagine like a light bulb that's working really well because the battery is strong, or a light bulb that's flickering, right? It's like comes on and comes off, comes on and comes off, comes on, right? Like, oh, do you want the light to be on? Do you want it to be flickering? Or do you want it off? And that we might actually have more conscious choice and direction of that than we thought. So in the meditation next time, we'll be bringing in again the breath. We'll be bringing in the perineal floor, and then we'll also be bringing in this where just like what Linda said, we open. We're this is why it's like the awakening awareness, but we're opening our awareness. We're opening our awareness slowly to allow now. So like we're making that intimate connection with what I would consider to be sort of cosmic consciousness. And we're opening up this flower or essence, or you know how like a telescope, it's like closed and then the walls open up and the telescope comes out, right? It's sort of like, so up until this point, it's sort of like we're like this, and then we're gonna sort of like we open up these walls that have held the antenna kind of closed. So we open up these walls consciously with our capacity to regulate emotions, thoughts, and sensations, and only do it to the extent that we feel comfortable, that we feel resourced. Okay. So now, right? So now we're aware that the cerebrospinal fluid may actually have this quality. We're aware that all the water in our body may have this quality. We're aware that our body is actually now an antenna. And so now with that awareness and with conscious intention, we're opening up those walls and opening up to that connection now with conscious, with cosmic consciousness, the Acacia's field, whatever you want to call it. And having then that relationship. Right. And then if you choose to, right, whatever you do, that you bring your telescope back in. And you do this, right? Okay, let me put out my antenna. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to put out your antenna. So there's an opening, right? But we're set. We're set. It's like we've moved. The fluid is moving. The battery is in. The circuit is on. And that's it. And now it's a connection. Okay. We'll do that next time.